CyberHub Engage podcast is brought to you by CyberHub Summit. CyberHub Summit is hosting its second annual cybersecurity conference in Atlanta, Georgia on October 10th at the City Winery, featuring live cyber war games. Find out more at cyberhubsummit.com. Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. My name is James Azar and I'm your host. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. We have a very special guest with us today. And today's topic is hiring the right team in information security. And it's really the challenge of a lot of cybersecurity professionals. There's a huge shortage of security professionals to begin with. So when there's a shortage, we tend to compromise standards. So our guest today is David Nolan, and he is the Director of Information. I had that written down, and I suck at that. So Director of Information Security at Aaron's. Hey, David.
How are we doing? Pleasure
Good.
to be here.
And I met David at RSA. We were on a boat.
On a boat?
We were on a boat drinking bourbon because that's what people from Georgia do. We go to California and hang out on a boat and drink bourbon. And so we had a great time, and we've kind of stayed in touch here and there. And so, we had, I think, what was it, like lunch 2-3 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And we were talking just about this, and I'm like, you know what? We should do an entire episode on it.
Certainly.
And so tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I've been in IT, I guess, since IT nerd, at least since I was 16. So ever since high school, I've always been at least in the IT side of it. I would say I'm a developer at heart, so always about solving problems and that type of thing. Done everything from insurance companies, generally Fortune 50 companies, to worked at Caterpillar for a while, worked for the government for a while, did that fun thing like yourself.
Uh-huh.
But security's always been something I've been interested in, even if as a developer. So it was just kind of a natural fit, especially as opportunities came up. Definitely have a passion for the topic we're talking about today, hiring and developing folks. And it's been a fun journey, man. It's just been great.
Yeah, you moved from the cold Chicago weather to the humid Georgia weather.
It's different.
Do you miss the big city feel of Chicago?
I miss the seasons, like the variety, where you get 2 weeks of the ultra hot there, and then you have 2 weeks of the ultra cold. But you have the seasons. So
right.
my wife misses snow, even though last year it felt like we had a full winter.
We did have a few snow days in Georgia last year.
Great.
Global warming, debate that one. But let's talk a little bit about your challenge in hiring the right people. What's the process that you go through? Because a lot of, CISOs today have kind of this, I don't think there's a method yet. There's no real way of hiring people. And cybersecurity is very broad.
Yeah, for sure. I think the first thing is there's this perception that we're in a hopeless industry for hiring, right? You always hear the million jobs that are lacking by 2020 or whatever the quote is. It seems to go up every time we hear it. But
4.7 million now. It's 4.7 million now by 2020.
Great. So we're all hopeless, right? But my whole point is with the right amount of creativity and just kind of taking a step back and being willing to question what you think of as the traditional candidate, I think we can get out of this and we can all achieve it, right? Still definitely a challenge, but we've had some pretty good success at our company, and that's kind of what I wanted to share. So generally, I kind of have 4 pots or 4 directions that I think everybody, no different from me, can pull from. The biggest one I always start with is the internal pipeline. And most people that I talk to start with like, oh, I just don't have people who have X, Y, and Z skills internally. But the great part is they're already at your company. They've probably been tried and true. So you have real results that you can look at. And you've got that insider information. So if you can find somebody with those right soft skills that maybe you're willing to take a little bit of a chance on, but has that initiative, that willingness to tinker and solve problems. What I've found is if they're willing to learn, sometimes those are the most successful people, and they already have that business acumen for your company. And arguably that is that secret sauce, when you bring someone new in. So that's the first one I always start with, is that internal pipeline. The other one is always getting involved in other pipelines. So most people automatically think, oh, hiring a recruiter. But when I say other pipelines, it's getting involved in colleges, going to recruiter fairs, getting involved in affinity organizations, which I think is a great pull. We are in things like Women Who Code and various organizations and conferences like that. But also getting involved in trade conferences and shows like we talk about here on the podcast. Those are just awesome pipelines. And sometimes kind of along with that, just the people in those contacts, either at those affinity groups or conferences, have netted some really great candidates for me as well. And of course, lastly, which is the option for everybody, the recruiters posting, kind of your traditional option. The one thing I do say with recruiters is, if you're going to go that route, make sure they understand your culture. Because a lot of recruiters will just look at resumes and they'll give you suggestions based on that, but they're really your front lines. So in a lot of cases, it's very important for them to understand your culture, to be able to pitch that and know if someone that you're bringing is a cultural fit.
So you guys are involved in a lot of different community stuff. We were just talking before we went
Certainly.
on that you guys did the Boys and Girls Club, right? Like you guys did that social test. So tell us just briefly about that, because that's a great thing that you yourself take essentially a huge part in, correct?
Yeah, certainly. I think that's hugely important, of not necessarily my current organization at Aaron's, but just us as cybersecurity professionals, really being involved in those organizations. And so we as Aaron's have been involved in sponsoring the cyber defense competition held at Kennesaw. We sponsored B-Sides, just great things for the community, but we've also been involved in like Women Who Code, Lead Like a Girl with the Boys and Girls Club, which is our sole focus there from the security side, was talking about things like cyberbullying and really helping those girls out. So it's not just for a pipeline, but I also think it's our duty as cybersecurity professionals to get involved in our communities, to provide awareness, and indirectly sometimes as having your brand out there, you're seen as that preferred employer and you get candidates you never would have imagined. So great opportunity.
It's a long-term plan.
Yeah, certainly.
It's a long-term plan, but when you're 4.7 million people short, you got to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What are some qualities you look for in a new hire?
I'm very much on the soft skill type of thing. So there's kind of a term I use inside called GSD, or get stuff done. It's that initiative. We want people that you're not going to have to sit there and say go solve this problem or do that. It's the people that are just hungry. They're hunting for problems. They're trying to find what's the best way I can improve this, right? And what really goes along with that is a thirst for learn. So a big kind of non-traditional thing we do at Aaron's in security is challenge the status quo. So just because, some magic quadrant says do it this way, buy this vendor, or, some SDLC says thou shalt do it in this way. Some of the coolest solutions we've had are just totally non-traditional ways of doing security that can enable the business, can get us speed, but can ultimately be arguably more secure, at least provide speed to security, which is a non-traditional concept, right? Speed and security. But those that are willing to really innovate and try new things, take risks, security, right? What is that?
It's all risk.
It's all risk.
It's risk management at best.
Yeah. So I really look for those. And I think innovation is really important in our industry because, my prediction is that the way we do security today is because of the things like, cloud and containers and IoT and whatever the current buzzword is, we're not going to be able to do traditional security, even in the SDLC. We're not going to be able to do static the way we did things because it just doesn't work as effectively in things like DevOps and fast-moving CI/CD pipelines. So we just have to think differently. And I look for individuals that are willing to do that, have that mindset, right? I'm not looking for the traditional, I need someone who has this vulnerability management tool and they've worked with it for 5 years. I can train somebody on a tool. I want somebody who's willing to integrate that tool into a pipeline, use the APIs to, so when we do infrastructure as code, security is already built into that pipeline, and we don't have to be, the office that sits in a castle over in the corner and dictates vulnerabilities and configurations and all that stuff. It's just part of the way we do things, hopefully.
You guys, your team, you guys integrate and you guys work a lot across the entire tech team, right? Mm-hmm. So it's different from, different guests we've had on the show because a lot of times, security is kind of an afterthought in a process, but
Certainly.
you guys have been able to develop a culture of security from the moment you start. Let's see how we can integrate security into the process, correct?
Certainly. Yeah, that's definitely the goal. I think you're never going to fully achieve that. It's just naturally there's some friction there, but we've had a unique thing where we try and break down those barriers. So I know that's one thing we talked about before is we're trying to move away from the traditional security model, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this. Certain cultures and governing models require it, but really dictating the way security has to be done. The whole office of no concept or whatever phrase you want to quote. But we try and reach beyond that and be not only a consultant but also a partner. So I challenge my teams, even if that takes us to say, take a step back where we'd normally say it's not my job to fix this problem. If we can innovate and give a team a solution that works in a pipeline, that's scalable, and then we can hand that off to teams, then that really goes a long way. It shows that we're willing to meet them in the middle or sometimes on their terms. It's showing that we're not just raising problems, but we're helping solve them for the betterment of the organization. So that's been a cultural thing that we've really driven. And it's hard, especially for the long security professionals, to get away from that mindset, because we're so used to, hey, you've got these 30 high critical vulnerabilities. Why haven't you fixed them? Instead of saying, what are the challenges you're experiencing? Why can't you fix them? Let's work together. Let's raise this to the right level of the organization if we both agree that it's critical, that type of thing. It's just a mindset change, really.
It's a problem-solving model.
Exactly.
Right, rather than it's all on your head, go figure it out. It's how can we all come together and kind of mesh it, and we're all on the same team. And I think that's what a challenge for a lot of people is. It used to be IT 10 years ago. I mean, you're an IT geek. Do you remember when you'd have to call IT, it was like a nightmare?
Yeah.
I mean, no one wanted the IT guy. Right
Yep.
now, people like the IT people, but the security guys have taken that IT role today in organizations, right?
Certainly.
So, how do you fix it? Because here comes the security guy with his
no.
phishing test, and here comes that newsletter that says how dangerous the world really is for us,
Yep.
and so you see that, and there's a lot of different threats for organizations, right? I mean, you kind of look at some of the more robust breaches, I want to say, or the more kind of like some of the bigger breaches in the headlines have all been insider threats, right? It's been one guy or a group of people within an organization infiltrating, taking data out, doesn't get caught until someone finds it on a dark web forum being sold sometimes. Or you get the call from the FBI or Secret Service saying, hey, we think you have a problem, right? How do you, that's really key. That starts at the hiring process, right? Because corporate espionage is a very, very big deal. And intellectual property is another one. And sometimes the easiest way to do it is to just send someone to work at a company and gather that data. So what are some of the stuff that you do to handle insider threats?
Yeah, I think the first thing, kind of like words like blockchain and everything else that's today, we got to take a step back and say, okay, what's the insider threat? Me personally, I put it into two categories: the malicious insider, which I think is what most people consider insider threats, and then there's the accidental insiders, which is people inside that don't know any better of what they're doing, right? And if you mentioned kind of pre-hire, there's a lot of things we can do post-hire. I think pre-hire is a lot of just blocking and tackling, right? Things like background checks, reference checks, especially in a small security community, reaching out to your peers and saying, have you talked to John or Sally or worked with them, and what kind of, just to say, what's their work ethic? What kind of morals do they have? That type of thing. Behavioral-based questions I found are very successful in interviews, trying to not just ask resume-based questions or technical questions, but, name a time when, or how would you work in this situation? Something that somebody can't just, BS their way out of in an interview.
Well,
so
I've always found interviews to be a little bit cumbersome.
They can be, yeah.
Right? Because typically the questions are kind of, well, you're going to get, 10 different questions, and these are going to tell us about a time you were really stressed out and you had to work in a team, and what were some of the things you did to get the team to get over the stress. And people prep for that. It's asking them the questions that they don't prep for. Kind of helps you realize who they are.
Yeah, you got to put them on edge. I mean, you can ask them like either cultural or ethical issues and things that they can't say like my worst weakness or my best weakness is really what the question actually is. Try and put them on edge, because the thing that I keep going back to, and I will throughout this, is the soft skills, because what I try and get out is our job as a consultant. So we're interpreting risk and how good they are at doing that, and not falling into the problem you alluded to before, where the sky's falling, right? How can we be realist about the risk we identified? And a lot of times you can ask that in interviews, right? You can get to situational based questions where you can have them interpret risk and say, how bad is this? What would you tell me if I was a business person or a board member, or whatever the scenario may be? So certainly, to your question, you can do stuff ahead of time. Once they're in the company and they're truly an insider, I think the malicious insider is all about visibility and least privilege, limiting the access to what's right for the business. And I'm sure everybody that's listening today is like, yeah. Easy to say, hard to do,
harder
right?
to do. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of different challenges in the insider threat, right? I mean,
certainly.
Was it, locally here, I think SunTrust was the last one to really hit the headline with the insider threat, where, a employee, ran off with like 1 million, PIIs and banking information of like 1.5 million customers.
Yeah. And it's something you're always going to battle. It depends on your company too. I mean, I've worked for a variety of companies, everybody where cyber espionage, for intellectual property, like that example is the primary threat, or kind of that external threat where the personal information is the real gold. So I think every company and every CISO really has to take a step back for any security program and say, what's important to my company? What's important to my culture? Because, as somebody like Aaron's versus somebody like a governmental organization are going to have two levels of risk tolerance. So based on your risk and your willingness to accept risk, that's really the way you got to look at it for insiders.
Do you do extensive background checks on people before you give them access to the vital information in the company?
I mean, you got to do your due diligence, certainly, right? So it depends on your organization. Like when I worked for the government, it seems like the interview was for the actual job was 30 minutes on the phone, and then the background check, the polygraphs, and all that stuff was months, right?
Right, because that's the real interview.
Yeah. So you got to right size it for your organization. Someone like Aaron's isn't going to do polygraphs,
right?
But you got to define in your process what is the right level of due diligence, if you will. So it just depends, and there is no right answer for all companies.
I think there's this, we talked about it already twice, but 4.7 million jobs that are supposedly need to be filled by 2020. Not enough people. I mean, I think Georgia Tech, I was on a panel with Dr. Lee, who is the head of information security at Georgia Tech. What was it, 2 weeks ago, I think? And he said, listen, we graduate about 120 graduates a year. Mm-hmm. Georgia Tech's one of the more advanced cybersecurity programs. I was with Helen, the CISO for Ohio State, about 3 weeks ago in D.C., she goes, we have an InfoSec program, but it may graduate 80 people. So, I mean, you look at the Ohio State University and Georgia Tech, that's 200 professionals every year, right? How do we fill that gap? I mean, what are some ways where, I guess enterprise and, and business can, connect with schools to help, make, kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, specific to schools, I mean, you got to be involved in the colleges around you. I've always been a huge proponent of that, back when I lived in Illinois with the colleges there, but even here, getting involved with for us at least, Kennesaw and Georgia Tech, Georgia State, Georgia, all those types of things. So you have a voice. So that way curriculum and the things that are being talked about and taught align with reality. Because so many students that we talk to is like, this job is nothing like what I was taught. And we try and get very heavily involved in a lot of the stuff I talked about, but also just into the classroom of working with the students to say, not everybody's going to take your word when you tell them, the sky is falling. And better yet, you're not going to have all this information. You're not going to have a fully vetted spec with test cases if you're a developer. You're not going to be able to just take a vulnerability and give it to a team and fix it. Those are the types of things that we can help mold those future students. So getting involved with those schools is very important, and that isn't just going to your career fair. That's actually putting some skin in the game. and making a brand out of it and making a name for yourself. So that's from the school side. I think part of what you're getting at too is, how do we fill that gap in general?
Right. I mean, school's one way, but I mean, there's obviously, I mean, you're an IT geek,
Yeah, I didn't get a security degree.
You didn't get a security degree. So obviously, I mean, you kind of provide that concept of, hey, taking someone who's an IT who's really good at it and maybe transition them to security as well.
100%. And, I've heard it here on your podcast a few times. A lot of us agree where, there are definitely roles that require more security experience, but I've had very, very good success over the years of looking at people who have that good IT base, someone who's creative and willing to solve problems. I absolutely, obviously I'm biased here because I'm a developer, but I love developers in security roles because they're very much focused on problem solving. They understand how generally IT works and how the business works. And most businesses are driven by development, automation, things like that, right? So if we can find those individuals who want to automate, who want to develop, who want to solve problems, and then train them on whatever the valid security topics is, those are the individuals we want. It's not the people who have 10 years of
send them to get certified.
Yeah,
have them go take one of the certs. I mean, really, that helps in getting someone to understand it. It's a starting point, right?
Certainly, because if we can be the bridge between IT and security, and we have individuals, even if they're not in our organizations, but we put them in IT, and IT and the business see us as someone who's trying to make it work in the business, make it work in IT. I've had 2 or 3 cases. I can tell you stories of where IT's been the one bringing security solutions to us, where they say. We'll go to them and say, how would you do this? Here's the problem we're trying to solve. We're trying to get where we want to integrate, various AppSec technologies into the pipeline, but you've told us that they don't work because, traditional models, it takes 2 days to scan or blah, 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 whatever the example may be. And then they come back and go, this is the way I would do it. Oh, and by the way, we're going to solve these other security problems by, integrating into their or leveraging concepts like infrastructure as code. And that's being driven by IT. And that goes a long way culturally. It goes a long way for adoption. And better yet, we solve the security problem, and it doesn't have to be security bringing it to the business.
So that kind of takes me to my next point, which is, when you and I had lunch, I was completely amazed at how you described every single department in your organization as part of a team. And you said it here on the podcast already. We're advisors.
Certainly.
Right? So, I mean, what have you done? What have you guys done at Aaron's as a security team that has helped bridge that? So, like the example you just gave is a perfect example. I don't know of a lot of CISOs who, or security teams that go down that route, and that's not a bad reflection on anyone else, right? I think, like I said, security guys are kind of looked at like IT guys were 10 years ago. They're the annoying guys in the organization.
Oh, no, security's here.
Right. Oh, no, security's here. It's like when IT shows up, okay, great, my computer doesn't work anymore. Let me call IT. The guy will show up half an hour later, right, and so forth. And so it's funny, but it's not funny. It's actually kind of, it's a cultural thing, like you said, but there's that, kind of looking down on security almost. Like, oh, here they come. What did you guys do?
Yeah,
what's your best practice?
Honestly, it's just weaving everything together. A lot of the examples I've already talked about, but breaking the barriers is all about changing the perception. I don't want to say changing the culture because, of course, culture is very hard to change and things like that. But it all starts with your security teams. So as I'm looking at my organization, of changing that mindset, of changing the conversation. Whatever the current buzzwords are, but I always tell my team when you enter into a conversation, always ask, what are you trying to do? As or what problem are you trying to solve first? Because if you go into it of saying, okay, here's our requirements and here's what you're trying to do, and you try and meld those two, there's generally a lot of friction. So it's just something as simple as that. Is if you're coming in and trying to make some interface work, and what you're trying to tell me you're trying to do is open up every million port and all the to IPs and everything in Azure, that may not be what you're trying to do. But if we can achieve the business problem, make it secure, everybody wins, and it goes a long ways to really enforcing that culture. So it's all about just changing your approach to security, not what you do at a core, not the controls you do, but just the way the conversation is held.
you shared with me a story about a developer who you hired for your security team. Do you remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
That was like the most passionate thing you said. It was like, took this developer, helped him develop these security skills, and he's in a great role. That's kind of a way where you kind of filled a role by not going after a traditional security folk, but going after someone who can actually address that.
Yeah.
And when you look at, breaking those barriers and, going outside just the realm of maybe IT and going into, your developers, your engineers, and so forth, what made you go down the developer route, and specifically that one hire?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of stories like that
Right.
on the teams. I don't want to make it sound like that's the only one, but that particular example where my background is development and AppSec,
Right.
and I think a what most people define as a application security leader is like the ultimate hard hire, because you combine security and development knowledge, right? So, after a long time of struggling to hire that perfect person, and by the way, talking to all the other peers, all of us struggling with that exact position, I said, what if we just take a developer? Because at the end of the day, that's the people this person would have to work with. And we bring somebody who's interested in security and really wants to develop in that, and we give them that opportunity. And we found one individual who really fit that mold and was an awesome cultural fit. So we've had a number of situations where this individual has been able to not only come in and do things like automate security principles, controls, if you will, but will also come in and, like, we were trying to completely automate and integrate the way dynamic testing was done in the pipeline. So it's not just, you have to go to security and put in a ticket and get these things done. And one of the teams came back and said, we can't do fully automated testing because we have these problems with this manual part of our testing we have to do, where we have to interact with, physical machines and terminals and that type of thing. And this individual said, well, I can create an emulator for that. I can automate your testing for you. Took them like half a day. So now the development, the QA teams now have fully automated testing, solves a problem for them. But really the security benefit for us is now we have automated security testing as part of that pipeline. So that's just some of the great examples of a mindset of just solving problems. And what's great about that is, in retrospect, we solved a security problem, made security better for the organization, but we also solved a business problem for IT.
Which has tremendous ROI, because now these guys aren't stuck.
Yep. And it I think the biggest gain in a situation like that is the perceptional gain, right? Of our teams aren't just seen as dumping dynamic scans down people's throats, which are notorious for having false positives, right? Now we're seen as we're automated, we're implemented. Oh, and by the way, when security comes to you, you don't have to be afraid, because we solve your problems too sometimes. So, yeah.
So we help you.
Yeah, exactly. We're enabler.
We're part of a solution, not part of a problem.
Exactly. Or at least we don't create more problems.
Well, you don't want, security in general is kind of viewed as something you now have to seriously consider, right? And there's a lot of advocates, we've had government roles where, people, make the argument that, government should, regulate security, or, do, active cyber defense or cyber deterrence, or all these, great different activities that, people want government to take, but, at the end of the day, government can only do so much.
Certainly.
And, after the Zuckerberg testimony, I don't know how much I want them writing laws that dictate our industry. I respect our elected leaders, no pun intended, but some of them I don't think still understand how the internet works, nonetheless how to secure the internet.
Yeah, I think government has a role, but I also think you have to balance that, right? Because you're right. Until we have people that are in those offices that can speak intelligently to the impacts to those decisions and the right way to write those laws, we're kind of in a balancing act. I think this is David's opinion, not my company's opinion, but it's ultimately this security, at least in our world, is a business decision, right? Where every company has a different risk tolerance. Every company has a different budget. You represent, CyberHub Academy represents a lot of medium to small size businesses.
Right.
Somebody that's a Fortune 50 is going to have a different budget, a different tolerance than somebody who is, a company of 50 people to 100. So we have to take that into account when we have these conversations. And my fear, not saying it's something real, is that overarching government laws are going to be hard to apply to everybody in the right way.
Did GDPR cause any problems for errands, or are you guys mostly domestic?
We're pretty lucky specific to GDPR, but I think that it started good conversations early, right? Because some of the legislation that's happening in California, it's inevitable that GDPR-like things are going to happen in the U.S., right? It's coming. So I think that GDPR has driven some good conversations. Whether the language and the controls are the right things are probably debatable, but I think it's driving companies to look at the right things to start at least.
You started IT. You kind of decided to move to cyber. Why? What was wrong with IT?
There's nothing wrong with IT. That's what all my peers and co-conspirators want to say, right? I've always been passionate about talking about highly technical concepts in business terms.
Right.
And you can certainly do that in IT, but I think that is just a core skill of security, right? Of being able to take these extremely technical and extremely, we'll say scary to most people, FUD-based problems and put them in terms of the business. Why should you care? It's so much fun to me to go to, a C-level or an executive who, no fault of their own, don't understand these deeply technical problems, kind of like your Zuckerberg example, right? And I have to be able to convince them in their terms why they care. Something like ransomware. That one's a little easier because it's ransom, but vulnerabilities on the back end. Why is patching important? Why is something like, a shadow broker's vulnerability? Why do they care? And that to me is just super fun. And that was an allure to me of coming into security.
Well, if you've ever been in government chasing bad actors, you're in IT, you're kind of more managing a network, and then you kind of want to go back to chasing the bad guys.
Yeah. It's
kind of.
It's a glorious thing. When I was with the agency for a while, we always said our successes will never be known and our failures will always be widely publicized. Right. It's the same way of every professional information security. if you're doing your job right,
no one hears.
No one cares. When there's a problem, everybody cares. So that is certainly.
That's a suicide mission.
It's a suicide mission, but we love it. I'm a hyper person. I love security because every day you come in is completely not what you expected. So to me, that's just really fun. And having a great team of individuals who have that mindset too of like, bring it on. What's the next cool thing we get to try and solve? And I think that talent is really being pulled into security, and that's what drove me to join.
So I'll ask you this. So I did an entire show on what makes a cyber expert.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I don't know if you heard it or not, but Jeff and I, who was my guest at the time, we were debating a cyber expert. Part of it was because I get about, and I'm sure you do as well, 10 different messages on LinkedIn a day of someone who claims to be a cyber. Well, I mean, you get vendor messages. I mean, only vendors who like wasting time contact me, because then I go, all right, I'll gladly, refer you to, Gary, and he'll, sell you a sponsorship at one of our events, or, we'll, because I'm not your address, buddy. I'm sorry. I'm just, I'm not it. Don't waste your time on me. Go focus on someone else. But a lot of different experts out there. Everyone, I get. Since launching the podcast, I get a lot of different, people say, hey, I'd love, to come on your, your show and talk about, all these different aspects of cybersecurity. And I'm like, yeah, I think you're trying to create a market rather than address a need of a market. Mm-hmm. So you see all these different experts.
Yeah, certainly.
And I'm you're not watching this because we're not video yet. We will be video next month, so you'll
perfect timing.
You're like, I don't have a video face. We're gonna try it, right? So,
there you
go. These cyber experts, and I'm saying that in parentheses, but what's your definition of a cyber expert?
Yeah, I think I'm like a lot of my peers. In my opinion, an expert is more about experience than book smarts. It's someone who's been in the trenches, who knows the practicality of the conversation. I'm accountable for ultimately making our company secure, and then making solutions that we purchase and things that we develop scalable, successful, with a good ROI, right? So, I don't go to somebody who's only looking at the next coolest thing. What I got to be concerned with is does it work practically? Do I have to hire 30 more people to support this, right? So my peers, a lot of times, are the experts, right? Because the conversations at these conferences, as we're standing around drinking beers, are have you tried vendor X, Y, and Z? Is it up to fluff, or is it all marketing? When they say AI and whatever the buzzword is,
machine learning.
Yeah, machine learning, or AI is machine learning most of the time. Like, what practical problems did it solve for you?
Deception.
Oh, that's the worst. I feel like we've had that for 20 years. You got honeypots. Anyhow, so yeah, it's the folks who have lived it, right? Better yet, it's the folks who have made mistakes. It's the folks who say, "I've got those battle scars," and they tell me, "Don't do it this way." Not this is the cool thing to buy, but just from my experience, please don't make these same mistakes. Those are the people I follow, and I love to talk to. So
there's a lot of, when you look at these different experts and you read a lot of different things online, there's a big difference. If you're in information security, period, right? Peers are always like your best. Your peers, your ISACs, are pretty much the most reliable information you're going to get. Outside of, if you've got your clearance and you're getting stuff from, the NKIC or other places, then that's a whole different story altogether, right? Reading the news, it's almost always, the sky's falling, it's doomsday, we're shit out of luck. Oh, the Russians are in our critical infrastructure. The Chinese are
they're everywhere.
They're everywhere, right? And you kind of get to the point where you go, all right, we get it, but still, we're doing fine.
Mm-hmm.
But do you go with there's an argument being made of what needs to wake people up is a cyber 9/11. There's others who say we don't need a 9/11. We're getting stabbed every day. We're bleeding out, and no one's doing anything to stop the bleeding. David Nolan's personal opinion: are we bleeding out, or are we waiting for the big thing that shuts down half of the electricity on the East Coast to be like, oh, we really got to take this a little bit more serious now?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you sit. If you're in security, if you're in corporate America, I would say we're in the death by a million cuts instead of 1,000 cuts. We're constantly being hit in various forms. Whether that be just traditional phishing and spear phishing and trying to find every single last port, or you got 100,000 systems and you got that one that doesn't have that one patch on that one day for that 1 week where someone was out sick, right? That's the things that we struggle with, and is the reality. And that's why when we talk to peers, that's what we talk about is that type of stuff. But I think if you take a step back at the macro level, the government level, there's an awesome book I just read called The Perfect Weapon. Talks about cyber warfare and stuff like that, and it's a reality that's coming, right? So I think both perspectives are definitely valid, and I share both of them. In my professional world, it's the first, but I think we don't need a cyber 9/11, but I think we all know that there's a potential to have something like that, where cyber is really the new warfare, whether it be pre-warfare to spread confusion, like the whole DNC target, or if it's something that's part of the warfare strategy.
I mean, election meddling to me is a 9/11 kind of attack, because there's no other way to look at it. I think people are waiting for electricity to go out, internet to be done. I think people are waiting for like that movie scenario, that Hollywood scenario of what a cyber 9/11 would be like.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, hey, we've already gone through a bunch of them. The 2016 election meddling and misinformation, that is a attack.
Certainly. Yeah, it's and that's why I quote that book, is they talk about what's the definition of terrorism. And I think it's really hard to define those physical concepts in terms of cyber. Like, when is it just when is it corporate espionage? When is it governmental espionage? When is it when did we go across that gray area when you're bridging into critical infrastructure and now you're hitting people at the end? It's a gray area, man, and unfortunately, that's where we're at.
School started this week. Your kid's back in school.
Oh yeah, traffic can tell us all that, right?
Yeah, tell me about it. I got stuck behind a school bus this morning. A road that takes me 3 minutes to drive through took me 13. I was like, oh. Right. And every time I try to just kind of squeeze to the left of the bus, like, try to speed through it before the stop sign comes on.
Don't pass that bus.
Yeah.
Not worth it.
Yeah. Right. Every time I think about it, I'm like, oh, no, don't, just as the bus is pulling over, you just want to like speed right by it and not slow down behind it.
Not worth it, man.
No, I know. But, we started talking about this. You talked about the stuff that you guys do with, women of code, girls of code, boys and girls clubs. Mm-hmm. What do you talk to your kids about internet safety?
Mine are young enough that the topics are a little different, but like I said, we get involved in the community quite a bit. So I think the thing I always start with, and it's no surprise to them, is everything is public. Even Instagram type things and Snapchat, those still are screenshotted. Those are by folks, and there is no such thing as public or as private. Sorry. And you have to be weary of that. And I think a lot of kids are okay with that, but they just don't understand what that can mean, And it goes with like cyberbullying, right? It's no longer just a private conversation one-on-one. It's no longer just us, going out by the oak tree and dealing with our problems. It's now of one comment can turn into someone having self-esteem issues when 1,000 people like it, right?
Right.
And it's really talking about that difference of, why is cyber different, or why is the internet different? And even the difference between virtual friends and real friends. Do you really know the person on the end of that Fortnite group that you've been playing with for the last year? Do they have your best interests in mind, like your friend would at school? It's just, perspective, because especially, the millennial generation, right at the edge of that, where we didn't necessarily grow up in it, but we saw the transition. And I think that's a really important perspective that the older generation doesn't have, and that the new generation doesn't have, because they're growing up in it. So that, and of course the obvious security stuff, protecting your phones, because that's everything's on it these days.
Right.
Passwords, all that type of boring stuff that we always talk about. But it's really that it's a different world, and they got to understand what that means.
I think kids today have a harder time growing up. I think a lot of it too is parents. I think parents a lot of times don't know how to handle new technology. Mm-hmm. And you want your kid to fit in, right?
Certainly.
You want your kid to be part of the same group. You don't want your kid to be that paranoid, kid like, don't take my picture. It's public. I'm having a bad hair day. I'll never get over this one. And so there's that piece about educating parents who, we're lucky. Mm-hmm. We're in security.
We're in IT, yeah.
Right? We're in IT. So, when our kid has a phone, we grab it. We go, all right, these are all the things you don't do. These are the stuff you block.
Certainly.
99.2% of the population isn't.
Yeah.
Most of them are not educated on it. Is there anything that we can do as a community to help kind of get that message across, in your opinion?
Yeah, for the other parents, the ones that don't have that experience, I think there's some awesome resources that I give out to parents, specifically to security. Like ISC Squared has it's a Garfield centric parents and kids help. I can't remember exactly what they call it, but I think it's staying safe on the internet. And there are other resources just like that, right? Where you don't have to be an IT expert. It gives both the tools that you can give your kids and the advice you can give your kids, but also the parent side of it, of what is Snapchat, goes into specifically what are the concerns, what are the good things, what is it? Because a lot of times when you hear like, what's GroupMe, what's music.ly, someone said that earlier, a lot of parents are going to be like, I have no clue what that is, and this resources like that really help educating them. So it's all just about providing both sides of the coin, the right resources. because I'm gonna sit down and bore them or over technicalize them, if you will, in an hour. So I love those resources. Granted, I don't think the younger generation knows Garfield, but it's still
What's
a great
Garfield?
Stat. Yeah, what's Garfield?
I mean, they just now are discovering the Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles.
Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Respect, man.
Respect. I'm sorry. Like, they're just rediscovering it now because of the new movies.
Yeah.
Before that, no one knew what it was. It was like, it's like Power Rangers.
That's coming back, I hear.
Yeah, it's coming back. Backstreet Boys coming back.
Backstreet's not back again. Don't say.
I'm telling you right now, Backstreet did a thing with Jimmy Fallon. It got like 30 million hits on YouTube. It was horrible.
Oh, man.
Yeah, horrible. I don't know if it was like 30 million like women in their 30s and 40s who liked Backstreet Boys when they were, famous, or it's our office manager Sylvia loves the Backstreet Boys, and we always have to give her that debate. And then fanny packs are making a comeback.
It's
Micah
a satchel.
loves fanny packs.
It's a satchel.
Micah loves fanny packs. We flew to Austin. He came to the airport with a fanny pack and cargo pants. It was the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Man.
It was the
research beer belly fanny pack. Those are the best.
Really?
It looks like part of your beer belly is hanging out, but it's really the fanny pack. Fabulous.
I am speechless. I've seen the flip flops, the fanny pack flip flops, where the top of the flip flop is a fanny pack on both feet.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'm gonna get those for Micah once I can actually locate them.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. Danger.
And with that, we've lost control.
And with that, apparently the 90s are making a strong comeback in 2018, right? We missed the 90s. I wonder if they're going to do like a Beverly Hills 90210 remake.
I'm just happy Legos are still strong. That's my most excitement about the 90s.
Legos. Yes. Didn't they make like this what was it, like this new technology for my God, what am I forgetting? Like the potty stuff, Play-Doh. Like they have this new I'm having like listen, I started keto yesterday. I'm
Best
sorry. Yes, I know. So I'm drinking coffee with no sugar. I can't have any fruit. I'm spending an hour and about 15 minutes every day at the gym.
Whew.
And I'm trying to get fit for October 10th, man.
You have a stronger will than I do.
I got to shave the pounds off. I wish I looked like you. You eat a burger and you still have a metabolism of a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
I eat a burger, I get
hard.
jiggly. I mean, not cool. All right, David. It's true. Just, it's really bad. I'm trying to be, I'm trying to live longer than my anticipated lifespan at this period of time in my life. So, and so I'm having a little of a, sugar, like,
it works.
No sugar.
Keto works. It's just discipline that I don't have.
You're in the agency. I'd expect you to have discipline, man. That is like the first thing you learn.
Not with food and drink. It's one of those vices that God put us here to enjoy.
I agree. That's why you do, I was looking up last night, like dessert recipes for keto. No, it's not sweet potato.
Add
you
chalk.
can actually have, no, it's not that. You can actually make like homemade like whipped cream that's made out of heavy cream that you mix, but you can't add any of the good stuff that you would typically add to make whipped cream whip, right? But it ends up being kind of whippy. I don't eat beets. I don't do beet spaghetti.
I've done spaghetti squash as the noodles. That works really well.
That works really well too.
Really well.
Thank you Whole Foods for actually doing the whole swirls already, so I don't have to use the machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's zucchini or squash. And you just add a little bit of tomatoes on it, and life's good.
Amen.
All right. So now everyone knows I'm on keto. So on October 10th, hopefully I'm 30 pounds lighter and doing backflips on the stage, and it'll be great. So, David, thanks for being here with us today,
great.
man. I really appreciate it. This was awesome. And so Aaron's, obviously, guys can check out their website. These guys have a great organization if you're looking for a job or whatnot. Give David a call, or Elmir. Is it you? Is it
Definitely
you?
me. We'll start with me.
Start with David. And you can find him on LinkedIn. Just contact me. I'll give you his phone number, email address. If you're a vendor, ring me.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm joking. No, really don't do that. I won't.
You probably already have my info if you're a vendor.
It's on one of the many lists of
One of the
CISOs
many
that are
lists.
out there.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So, perfect. David, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
This is the CyberHub Engage podcast. We'll be right back after this message. The CyberHub Engage podcast is brought to you by CyberHub Summit. CyberHub Summit is hosting its second annual cybersecurity conference in Atlanta, Georgia on October 10th at the City Winery, featuring live cyber war games. Find out more at cyberhubsummit.com.